I think we will begin. Can I start?
Yeah, sure, Shalini.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Welcome to this week's research forum. We are meeting after quite some time. I think today I don't have to formally invite the guest. It's more like a welcome back because Niyati was part of our department of the 1820 batch, and currently she is a research scholar at the Department of English and Foreign Languages, Bharatiya University. Her research areas include cultural studies, spatiality, identity, and memory studies. And we can see her passion towards writing, photography, and culture and human narratives reflected in her research as well. She recently presented a paper at the Emerging Dialogues in Peace Linguistics International Conference, and the topic was Peace Linguistics and its Approaches in Multicultural Spaces. Today, she will be giving us an exploration of space in the context of multicultural aspects of Calicut, specifically with regards to the Gujarati diaspora in Calicut, and she'll be taking the specific structure called Desain Ashram for her study, for her exploration. So I don't want to delay further. Let us get started. Over to you, Niyati.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you so much for the introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Niyati Pavithran, like she just said. Today, we'll be looking at space and how space can be approached in research. It is part of cultural studies and also humanities, definitely. So, we'll see how we can treat space as a text. And this would be part of my PG project that I did while doing my master's. So I'll also share with you the experience of having decided on this topic and how I came about to decide that I would take space for my PG project as the main title and topic for my research. So let's move on and let's begin slowly. Okay, so am I audible? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we shall begin with a very brief introduction about spatial studies. Although the spatial turn has no particular date of inception, one notices a marked increase in the critical attention being paid to matters of space in the 1970s and 1980s. For example, with major philosophical contributions from Henry Lefebvre, whose The Production of Space appeared in 1974, and Gilles Deleuze, who, especially in his collaborations with Felix Guattari, increasingly couched his arguments in spatial and geographical times. By the early 1990s, it seemed that a good deal of the most important work being done in the humanities and social sciences was, in some way or the other, tied to matters of space, place, and mapping. The transformational effects of post-colonialism, globalization, and the rise of ever more advanced information technologies helped to push space and spatiality into the foreground as traditional spatial or geographic limits were erased or redrawn. Today, spatial literary studies offer an approach to literary and cultural texts that emphasizes the relations between space and writing. It offers a new perspective that seems particularly momentous in the 21st century, as borders and boundaries seem to be transgressed, erased, redrawn, or reconceived almost daily. The reassertion of space in literary studies has made possible a wide array of fascinating approaches, as well as theories and interpretations of works of literature and culture. The focus on spatial or geographical aspects of literature has also served to emphasize the dynamic relations between the text and the spaces and places represented in it. This bridges the divide between the word and the world and enables new perspectives on textual geographies and narrative maps. Drawing upon multiple literary, critical, and theoretical traditions, spatial literary studies today present many different ways of approaching questions of space, place, or geography and literature. By engendering novel perspectives, spatial criticism has opened up alternative vistas, which in turn can also help create new spaces for critical inquiry in the future. Moving on to the major theorists and works, we have Raymond Williams, and the work would be Country and the City. Next, we have Henry Lefebvre and his The Production of Space. And the last one would be Edward Soja, and the work is Third Space, Journeys to Los Angeles and Other Real and Imagined Spaces. So now I shall give you a brief idea about how I came about to choose space or spatial studies as my topic for my PG project. So it doesn't really start with the time I started my master's. Even before that, space and narratives have always intrigued me from the time I started exploring places, their histories, and culture. Literature and art had been my passion since childhood, and as I grew up, I developed an ever evolving conversation with spaces, both interiors and localities. Its constitution always enthralled me, and this also helped to unravel identities and discourses. So I've always had this habit of observing homes or interiors because every home or every room or an interior, to be specific, it always reflects the identity and the nature of its residents. So even if it comes down to the silence that a room shares, I feel the silence in itself was characteristic of each home, different and also in multitudes. While looking at posters or walls, for example, there was always this voluntary or unconscious bout on nature to see how else it could have been done. How would it be if it had been in another design or form or color? So that is how my mind usually worked while I was in different spaces. Further, while pursuing a master's at the University of Calicut, I chose cultural studies as an elective, discovering my area of interest for research. My project of Constructs and Conversations, a narrative on space, was an exploration of the construction of space through a recapitulation of Calicut and its Gujarati diaspora. It is about this that I shall brief you in today's talk. This experience and the affinity for the selected spaces rooted my ambitions for research. Gradually, I realized that it's the idea of space that I'd like to work on, to understand space as a text and to study life in this context. Kozhikode was the nearest spot and it had its own vibrancy for its past of native, settler, and colonial histories. I also wanted to know more about the place, which lay quite near, and also explore the place a little more. That's how I did an assignment on the Mishkal Mosque at Kutichira in Calicut. So I wouldn't delve into the details here. This is the image of the Mishkal Mosque at Kutichira in Calicut. These are other few images from the same place. So I wouldn't delve into the details here, like I said before. But the mosque, as you can see in the image, has turquoise blue walls with no domes, which is not really expected of a typical mosque structure. Instead, it has a tiled roof typical of Kerala architecture. A clear affinity to the structure of a Hindu temple can be observed in the structure. This includes the architecture of the tachans, the carvings, the roof, etc. This is also owing to its history, where the Zamorin, a Hindu king, reconstructed a Muslim place of worship when the Portuguese set fire to it. So these are images of the Mishkal Mosque. We shall move on now. So after doing this assignment on the Mishkal Mosque, we set about to explore more places in Calicut. So later on, we took around a few weeks again to explore the place, the markets, the transformed buildings, and the streets. These are photographs that I took during that course. Talking to people, asking them about the history of the place, etc. This journey was quite interesting as I got to speak to a lot of people. Through this, I also had the opportunity to observe their language, their interests, attitudes, and attachments towards the place. So while talking to people, there's also this element that they're entirely new to you. There is no expectation that you must stay. There is no personal connection, yet they decide, as the speaker is fully in power to decide what they want to tell you. They can tell you about anything and you're open to listening. And there's this sort of a conversation or interaction that happens here when you talk to them. Somebody who's entirely different from you, from an entirely different place, another walk of life, with maybe similar paths that we have crossed, or maybe in totally dissimilar ways. Uh, but there's always something that you can relate to. So that human factor, and also that interest that they could rise in me about knowing the place better, or about knowing their lives better, was also quite interesting. So I got to observe their language, their interests, attitudes, and attachments towards the place. I also clicked a few photographs of the streets, of interiors of spaces, and people on the streets. There were times individuals or groups would share their own problems, which could be both personal and also beyond personal. Not every information or conversation was directly resourceful or relevant to the study, but now that I look back, I feel it has all helped in a cumulative way to gain a holistic and organic understanding of the space, which further led into the interpretations or connections I found. So, while visiting different sites, some people invited us into their homes, and this was a chance to see how their homes looked on the inside. The way the buildings were structured, the colors involved, basic couches or sofas, and the bed sheets that they had spread across them so that dust wouldn't fall on their furniture. How the television was placed and how the room had access to the same from different spots. How they would behave with or talk to their spouses or children or parents. And sometimes this would also be in their own languages, which we did not really understand. Moving to the next lens, to the next slide, sorry. So there were multiples of everything in different aspects within those four walls that we visited, like their features, definitely, and then their interiors, the decorative pieces or articles within their homes, their language, the aura and the smell of what's being cooked, or even the scent characteristic of each home. Their jewelry and elements like sindoor on their face or a veil on their head. There was also so much to observe, and what was striking is that they came from different paths and places. Because when you talk of Kozhikode, we know Kozhikode has a history of uh, a colonial history along with native and settler histories, right? So there was always this element of multiculturalism that strikes you. It does not, it's all in the same place, but it comes from very many different places. So this was quite striking, as they all came from different paths and places, and yet they were all there existing together, making us notice the belongingness of people, spaces, and articles that have traveled far to be here within Gujarati streets in Kozhikode in Kerala. One such experience was when we had the chance to pay a visit to Vijay Singh Padamsi's home, who's one of the oldest among the Gujarati migrant community in Gujarati street. So the first image is of Vijay Singh Padamsi. You can also see the photographs of his ancestors on the wall. So this was the journey of exploration before I eventually chose this space, Design Ashram, for my study. You can see how the interior of a rice mill and also a woman working at the rice mill. The last image is the view from the first floor of a Gujarati family's residence. Now, moving on to the project and what I did for my PG project. I took up this space called Design Ashram, which is in Gujarati streets in Kozhikode. And before we delve into the study on Design Ashram, I would like to give a brief account of the Gujarati migration to Kerala. When exactly the Gujarati traders reached the port cities of Kerala and other South Indian states is a conjecture. The community began its systematic migration to Kerala during the 19th century and had settled in various cities in small groups. The members have different stories to narrate about their migration, quoting Dhaka and Decca, but there are not any specific witnesses or documentations regarding their reason and time of settlement. Contemporary Portuguese writings prove that they had reached Kerala even before the Portuguese. A writer of the Portuguese factories of Cananor and Kozhikode between the period 1501 and 1530, Duarte Barbosa mentions the Gujaratis in Kozhikode. There is another view that the Gujaratis had migrated to Kerala 800 years back when Muhammad Ghazni invaded Gujarat. Their presence, however, was only felt from the 18th century, as it was then that they chose Kerala as their place for permanent settlement, and the long process of the Gujarati migration to Kerala extends over a period of 5 centuries. The Gujarati migration to Kozhikode has contributed much into the multicultural atmosphere that Kozhikode shares, largely through trade, shaping something peculiar like the Gujarati street in, and also spaces like what Design Ashram, the site under study, is today. So, Let's move on to talk about Design Ashram. Design Ashram was once a Gujarati residence, and that is when two architects transformed and reformed the space into what it is today as Design Ashram. So, Design Ashram can be described as a community space for the like minded and is a beautiful undertaking located in the historically and culturally well known Gujarati streets in Kutichira, Kozhikode. It is in walking distance to the South Beach and is located very close to the Lalitakala Academy. This 100-year-old courtyard residence was previously home to a Gujarati family who set down roots in Kozhikode, encouraged by the progressive Samudiri king. It was in 2017 that Design Ashram set about or was established. Architect Brijesh Shaijal, the principal architect, tells us how the idea of taking up this space and developing it into something like Design Ashram took roots as they walked through Gujarati Street, which is more than 100 years old, with most of its buildings in their final stages of life. He also points out that, as the name suggests, the expanse does not limit itself to single individuals, but to individuals collectively, into associations and organizations. The architect shares with us the initial stages of the undertaking and devising of the establishment from a residential space into an entity like Design Ashram. He says that the courtyard was pretty dirty and that there were a few Gujarati families who were residing there. It is beautiful how they still live there as part of the same building, accommodating both tradition and reconstruction. He tells us how they have both maintained a few spaces as it is and how they have also renovated others by adding a couple of characters. Their neighborhood constituted new shops that made use of the parts of old buildings, windows, old doors, etc. They collected such architectural details and design elements that they brought together to make combinations, which was well striking in such an environment. He tells us that they did not do much on it as an architectural design element, as they focused on maintaining a few spaces. Quoting directly, removing a couple of walls and adding some spaces together and adding some character, the architect says. These are what eventually became the persona for Design Ashram. We can see that the space was renovated with due respect to the context of the Gujarati migration, retaining the rustic ambience. What they had to undertake next was the task of adding life to the built space, which consisted of the people that added life, the element of the earth and healing to the atmosphere, especially their courtyard space. Their visitors too much applaud this positive energy that the space offers. It is the same 1.5-year-old tree that gives shade to the whole space, along with the flexibility to conduct various events within their courtyard. The strong roots of the people always reminds the visitors of the significant past of the space, one of migrations and intertwined cultures. Fluid yet rooted till date, a history not yet erased. He tells us how the tree makes it possible to accommodate around 50 to 100 people under the tree for personal and public gatherings. It is also the venue for the open mic sessions on every Wednesday, which is a platform for the aspiring singers, musicians, budding poets, and comedians. These are also images of Design Ashram. At Design Ashram, they organize weekly and monthly events to provide positive reinforcement to the arts and culture scene in Calicut, like the book swap, open mic Wednesdays, and art workshop, etc. Design Ashram thus visualizes a vibrant arts and culture scene in Kozhikode and provides a platform for young artists to experiment with their talents. Design Ashram encompasses an art gallery, a library cum lounge, a dormitory, a guest room, and the architectural office space, making the space one which embraces heterogeneity, making it a much fluid and ambiguous field. The art gallery makes it possible for them to receive art and ideas from wider macrocosms and also to let this flow out to the public, like how they have served as a venue for the Kerala Literature Festival over the years. The library shares with the visitors and travelers books that were donated, and this was an idea that the curators brought in to reverse the notion of sharing and reading, to revert the notion of sharing and reading, or perhaps even shared reading. Moving on, we also have a dormitory at Design Ashram. The dormitory accommodates up to 12 people, and the guest room is one where two people can stay quite comfortably playing a vital role in endorsing a co-living space where co-living and co-working goes hand in hand. Students from Cochin, who were inmates of the dorm during the literature festival, points out how well the space where they spent their days went hand in hand with their place of stay, making it possible for them to move themselves into an entirely different and perhaps refined atmosphere for 4 whole days, still feeling at home. Design Ashram also opens a gate on their sideboard into Gudam Art Cafe, which comprises an art gallery, an antique store, and a cafe. Architect Shahjal also recounts how, quoting directly, Calicut is still a virgin city in the tourism map, unquote, and how Design Ashram becomes a great aid as they offer a free stay for all backpackers and genuine travelers for 2 days. The stay could also be a great start for the company as they get to meet others from different ways of life, culture, and experience. They also have their architectural office space and design cell DAC, Design, Art, and Culture, in the same space. Throughout the journey of reading, visiting the site, and talking to the residents and members, it was always beautiful an experience to see how Design Ashram as a space created an identity for itself. Like I said before, it was once a space which was used as a residential house and also as a storehouse or a warehouse. But today it is home to culture so refined. Vital to its uniqueness is definitely its fluidity of how it holds together differences, cultures, and contents, and then forms a whole, always open to more thoughts and ideas. The effort sought the considered case to speak for the distinctive characteristic and temperament of most spaces that go unnoticed or sometimes even considered irrelevant. Now, let's move on to a few theoretical perspectives on the same. Uh, Talking about the theoretical aspects, I would primarily discuss a few ideas of Henry Lefebvre, Edward Soja, and Doreen Massey, which is relevant to the study here. Lefebvre, in his work, The Production of Space, explains how the historic notions of space are analyzed on three axes. He divides space into the first, perceived space of everyday social life and commonsensical perception that combines popular action and outlook, but is often ignored in the second, the professional and the theoretical conceived space of cartographers, urban planners, or property speculators. So the perceived space is where a civil engineer works. You see the structures, the space as it exists. And the conceived can be a map of the space or a plan of the building or whatever. So in spite of these, Lone Totel, the person who is fully human, dwells in the lived space, that is the third space here, and endured space or spaces of representation of the imagination which has been kept alive and accessible by the arts and literature. The lived space has the power to transcend and also to refigure the balance of popular perceived space and the official conceived space. This was the triadic division into which Lefebvre divided space. We shall later see how these three spaces coexist and complement each other in the space considered for study. Next, we have Edward Soja. Edward Soja again divides space into first, second, and third space. The first space is the actual or the real place, the physical buildings, structures, and geographical coordinates that can be mapped and seen. The second stands for the representations of the space, like a photograph of it, and the third portrays the lived space, the relationships, emotions, and experiences, the lived relations, which is a combination of the first two. He discusses how spatial experience has changed over time in relation to social circumstances. We have also witnessed the social production of space that has helped conceive and yield the idea and sphere of design ashram. Soja is known for his contributions to both postmodern political geography and urban theory. He is one of the key figures associated with the spatial turn in geography. Soja updated Lefebvre's concept of the spatial triad, as we have mentioned, with his own concept of spatial trialectics, where he employs the trialectics rather than the dialectics of human geography, which included third space or spaces that are both real and imagined. His work emphasizes on the equal importance of history, contemporary social relations, and spatial constructs in understanding the urban environment around us. In his essay, History, Geography, Modernity, Soja advocates on how space is treated as dead, while time as one of richness, fecundity, life, and dialectic. Directly quoting Soja, We do not live inside a void that could be colored with diverse shades of lights. We live inside a set of relations that delineate sites. Unquote. One also finds great scope in the studies of the British social scientist and geographer Doreen Barbara Massey. Massey consistently argues for the importance of place. She states that places do not have single identities, but multiple ones. Places are not frozen in time, they are processes. Places are not enclosures with a clear inside and outside, says Massey. Massey employs a relational approach in understanding space and place, and this approach was structured around a set of interrelated concepts. We see one such in her essay, A Global Sense of Place. Places to Massey are particular moments of intersecting social relations and networks that have been constructed over time. They have interacted, decayed, and also renewed by themselves. There are relations like these that might be contained within the place, and also those that might stretch beyond the boundaries, binding the particular locality to wider relations and processes, which may implicate other places too. We observe the same how a once local space now becomes global, with a shift in its utility and also with divergent ideas that flowed in with travelers. According to Massey, localities are not simply spatial areas you can easily draw a line around. They will be defined in terms of the sets of social relations or processes in question, and crucially, they are about interaction. Massey views space as a cut through the myriad stories in which we all live at any one moment. She considers space and time to be intimately connected. Quoting, space is not a flat surface across which we walk, unquote, says Massey, and quotes Raymond Williams, where he describes the incident of taking, quote, a train across a landscape where we don't actually travel across a dead flat surface that is, unquote, space, but that we cut across a set of stories. The space is not a flat surface, but quoting Massey, is a pincushion of a million stories. Massey's progressive concept of place states that it is never static, but that they are processes, and that, quoting Massey, places do not have boundaries in the sense of divisions which frame simple enclosures. They are not necessary for the conceptualization of a place itself. Places also do not have a single unique identity, and at the same time, none of the above ever denies place or its importance. Massey concludes by saying that, quote, it is a sense of place, an understanding of space, its character, which can only be constructed by linking that place to places beyond. A progressive sense of place would recognize that without being threatened by it. Unquote. So during the Gujarati migration, it was in the warehouses that the Gujaratis first settled down. Their later residential buildings too consisted of structures where the ground floor was used for storage and such purposes, while the first was used as the space for living. The space and structure which is now Design Ashram was also once such a space of living and storage. It is thus a slice of the then life, a space full of stories from the past. It is a living memorial of the migration and the trade that had happened during those times. It also records the process of how the Gujaratis built a home away from home. This has traveled from the past to the present, with two such families still living in the space, along with the changes that the founders have brought in. Design Ashram thus makes itself visible to us as a space of multiculturalism, fluidity, and ambiguity, unlike the other spaces that have been transformed, as they all stuck to very static and firm boundaries, like transformations into cafes, etc. Another example would be Kadala's Cafe in Calicut, if any of you are familiar with the place. An urban colony here has been converted into an architectural firm, which is an even more volatile field in history, as architecture is a field that accommodates spatial changes. The designs they create thus keep changing in correspondence to the needs of time. It is this inexactness that is the sole purpose of this isolated study on Design Ashram. Through a mesh, the space creates for us a narrative that takes us through a present that leads both to a distinctive past and to an evolving future with multiple meanings. Through art as a medium, they bring together people so different and unfold possibilities innumerous, which are awakening, thought provoking, and enhancing for every visitor. It also brings down a global perspective to a space that is local Through the travelers they accommodate and by giving them umpteen opportunities to share their experiences and also to explore Kozhikode better. We also see how the same space has contained elements so different, and also the transformation from a space of trade and residence to that which accommodates ideas so refined and people so diverse. Design Ashram is a space beyond boundaries, inculcating both a history and a present that shares cultures, habits, utility, and ideas across barriers. Coexistence of differences and the attribution of cultural meanings to identities across territories are the major characteristics of the space. The history itself contains both a natural environment and also also man-made choices of migration and trials of revisions, advancements and alterations. We also see how the space was and is fundamentally social, as it is shaped by the different occupants of the space and how they utilize the same. Choices and transformations were always held by social, cultural, and economic needs. One's spatial experiences are very much determined by their social circumstances, just as how the same space that is now Design Ashram has been utilized for multiple purposes by numerous individuals and groups over these years. And we see how this would always continue to. The space of Design Ashram can be divided using Lefebvre's tripartite system that we discussed earlier. I shall explain this here. At Design Ashram, the residential space occupied by the two families becomes the perceived space or the spatial practice, the area of everyday activity. The conceived space or the representations of space is how the architects conceive space through plans and designs, while Design Ashram as a whole becomes the lived space or the representational space arising from the imagination and the interaction of the previously mentioned spaces. The whole undertaking thus transcends and refigures the balance of the spatial practice or the conceived space and the representations of space or the perceived space that refigures the balance of the two, conceived space and perceived space, which becomes a part of the lived space. Design Ashram refiguring the balance of the two, conceived and perceived, which becomes part of the lived space. Every space is shaped from utilities and purposes. This makes it a result of social interactions, as said above. At the space under study 2, utility becomes the driving force for each of its transformations. In the past, the requirement of a place for stay and of a room for storage transformed the building into a residential spot and a warehouse. Gradually, as this utility lost its significance, the place shifts with time due to the changing social interaction patterns to what it is today. The shift can also be a result of globalization. Thus, Design Ashram is just another example that proves space essentially as man-made. Design Ashram possesses the equal importance of history, contemporary social relations, and spatial constructs in comprehending its environment. It can space both real and imagined. It is an aggregate of both visible structures, a dated history, and also ethereal ideas and art, both palpable, seen, and non palpable. We see how simultaneous progress of both history and space altogether, how both time and space becomes equally important. From the advent of the Gujaratis till today, along with history, the evolution of the space and its utility has also evolved. It was a complete space of residence and storage, while today it is a space of high culture, art, ideas, and travel that accommodates both the residents and guests. There is a shift that happens with both its purpose and residence. This further highlights the simultaneous importance of both space and time in analyzing or understanding a location. Space is never dead, but always changing and also created. The shift that occurs in the 20th century of giving more importance to geography can be seen in the way we view Design Ashram today. Design Ashram 2 is one such pincushion that Massey mentions. It is a space with a foundation rich in history and transition, and also a present and future built on ideas already stated and on those yet to come and to be shared. There is no space that exists without its past or its present. So that doesn't become a flat, dead surface. Rather, it becomes a pincushion of a million stories. At Design Ashram, one cuts across. Excuse me. At Design Ashram, one cuts across from stories from the past, stories from a residential space, from a warehouse, and from a topple down building to what it is today. In her essay, A Global Sense of Place, Massey employs a relational approach structured around interrelated concepts to understand space and place. Her way of conceiving space as a moment where social relations intersect and as points where nets of such social relations have been constructed and where they have interacted, decayed, and renewed can also be observed in the history of the space that Design Ashram occupies. We come across the social relations and interactions between the Malayali and Gujarati community and between traders. Such webs of both trade and residence have been built and have later on decomposed by itself and also because of external causes. Even today, one can conceptualize a web of social relations that coexist between the residents, architects, artists, and visitors. Massey says that localities are defined in terms of the sets of social relations or processes in question and that they are about interaction. Design Ashram again becomes an exemplar here as it accommodates people from so many different cultures. They have two Gujarati families who share roots from both Gujarat and Kerala, as they have been here for many years. They often have a very heterogeneous crowd visiting them during events and also sharing ideas and talents with another set of audience who can reciprocate and respond to the same on Wednesdays during their open mic sessions. The dorm and the guest room are also open to people from different places and cultures. The architectural firm, on the other hand, has been involved in creating spaces and also accommodating architects from various walks of life with diverse tastes. These are at all these are all at constant interaction too, making the space ambiguous and fluid. Thus, Design Ashram accords with what Massey thinks is important about spaces, that they are not single identities, that they are processes, and that they do not have enclosures. It completely denies that a place is not a single identity and that it is not always simply constructed out of a mentioned history. We see how the space Design Ashram is a process that keeps changing. The space brims with multiple identities and purposes. It is the result of a past and a present, unpredictable and ever evolving. From the intersecting relations between Malayalis and the Gujaratis, be it the migrants, laborers, residents, and traders, to what happens there today, the interaction of ideas and thoughts between the architects who hail from different cultures, lands, and walks of life, along with the travelers and guests who are pretty temporary, but who are capable of leaving permanent marks, and the rendering of those who take up the sessions on Wednesdays, sharing their innovations and talents. Design Ashram documents a gradual history and also retains its fluidity and becomes a process which could keep advancing. Its characteristics are not bound between those four walls, as it includes and involves what's both inside and outside, what has been there, what is, and also all that is yet to come. The experiences that the travelers and the artists share are never restricted to their space alone. They carry tales from across lands and they share it with people who again take it along with them as they commute and interact. It often shapes experiences on how one perceives life, and through a society, this could form such a strong web of connections. Art, ideas, and also the spaces that the architects design are handed down to people from spaces never directly connected to the design ashram. It is an idea, a work of both the mind and soul, that they provide or even grant to a world so wide and open to adaptations and interpretations. The momentary experience that it gives to a visitor is a slice of history and legacy, but it also shares investments that could shape a person for life. What is inside those four walls, thus, becomes a result of all that which came, left, and stayed in between. As we conclude, we can see that space has turned out to hold an important role in studies today. It is in pace with time and is treated with equal importance. We see how space is alive all the time and that it alters but can never be destroyed completely. Space, as we observed, is ever evolving and also one that possesses multiple identities of its own. Its identities are a result of the processes that it undergoes through the times. Understanding design ashram in depth also thus led to identifying the life and vibrant ideas that lay within the space. Spatial studies too offers great scope to understand history, human behavior, social networks, and interactions. We can also thus say that it plays a vital and active role in shaping time and place. With that, we come to the end of this session. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude towards Janaki ma'am and the Department of English, University of Calicut, which is my own department, for this opportunity. I would also like to thank my friend and the coordinator of the research forum, Shalini, for her constant support throughout this journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niyati. That was such an interesting session, particularly because, Calicut is a place that we all know rather well. So I think we were all able to connect with your talk better. Now it's time for interaction, and I'll begin by asking, as you
Sure.
said, one factor that contributed to this multicultural aspect of Calicut is its colonial history. So, during the course of your study, did you find any lingering evidence of this colonial taste? Like in the case of Pondicherry or Mahi, did you see that lingering colonial effect in some places, in some structures or architecture somewhere?
All right. Talking about the architecture, um, while I studied this space design ashram, like I said, it was once a Gujarati residence, and it didn't really have any similarities with a colonial architectural style or that of the building. Rather, it had roof tiles like our own buildings here. It was more similar with that of Kerala architecture, to be honest. There was no particular similarity with a colonial style of architecture when considering the building of design ashram specifically. And also, my study does not really talk about structures. I don't really study architecture. Rather, I study space and understand space as a text rather than take just the architectural elements of these. I don't really focus on that area either. Am I clear?
Yes, yes, you're clear. Okay, okay, one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
How do we study space devoid of humans? Like you talked about the spatial triad. This perceived, conceived, and lived. Wouldn't it be a little meaningless without humans? So I just want to see how this can be placed in a different kind of space.
Okay, talking about time, space, and human beings, I don't really think I can give you a black and white answer on that. I find it's always coinciding, and I think it lies in the grace. Uh, Starting with time and space, I've also heard people ask questions if time is more important than space, or if it is space that is more important than time. I believe in the potential that it offers when you consider all these three elements with equal importance, like time, space, and human beings. So that is what I would like to say about this. And if you consider spaces without human beings, I can't say a space would be destroyed when it is devoid of the human presence. Uh, if you take away this anthropocentric view or look at it from a non-egocentric view, or even take eco-criticism, for example, I think nature takes up space in the absence of human beings. So the space exists there, but the evolution that the space takes up, the man-made aspect of it, especially about shifting its utility, like how from a residential area, this residential building, this design ashram happened, that has this man-made aspect of it, how human beings shift utility in order to create something new. So I don't think I can give you one perfect answer. If you talk about how nature takes up space, I guess we'll also have to make it interdisciplinary with life sciences and not just include things that come under humanities. So that's what I think it is.
Thank you, Nidhi, for elaborating upon that.
Okay.
So, if any of you have questions, any observations, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to do that now.
Thank you, Nidhi. It was a wonderful and interesting presentation. Am I audible?
I can't really hear you. Your voice is breaking.
Hello. Is it okay now?
Your voice is still breaking. Can you type side, JT?
Hello.
Yeah, it's audible now.
I'm in the hostel, that's why.
Oh,
Uh, I think it's okay now.
it's better now.
It was an interesting I was just curious to know how these people define their culture. These Gujaratis who are settlers, I think there are some settlers there you mentioned so.
Yes.
So how do these people um,
I can't really hear you now. Is it the settlers' perspective about their lives there, what they shared with me?
culture?
I couldn't actually hear your whole question. So sorry.
I think she's asking about this immigrants and how they perceive the space.
Okay, all right. So, from the human narratives that we collected in the journey of exploring the place, there was this set of people who are extremely happy about how times were before this. Right now, we know how in our country we have communal issues and things like that. So, before this, what they were saying is, especially with my experience where I studied the Mishkal Mosque, there was this time when the Zamorins actually made the Irawa women of the then times marry the Arabs so that they could actually come up economically in their lives with economic status, etc., as their lives were really backwards otherwise. So there was this person who shared that when you look into that, when you have a mother from another religion and a father from another religion, it brings in harmony. That was one thing that I remember that a person shared about this. About Gujaratis, they had their issues saying that sometimes the other Malayali Hindus overpower with their religious expressions and everything. That finally, sometimes they feel like they're still a minority there, in spite of the years that they have spent in the area. So these are a few stories I can actually recollect. Festivals and everything. They have a temple of their own and they celebrate their festivals, and their expression is also quite evident from what I could understand.
Saiju, it seems, is facing some technical problems. I hope that answers her question. So, are there any more suggestions or observations or any questions you want to
Can you
ask?
hear me?
Hello. Hi,
Hi.
hi.
What about their food habits? Is there any multicultural system is being uh,
Okay.
there in their food habits or something?
Okay. Food again is like another section of the study. I didn't actually study their food culture. I studied space and culture within spaces. So I don't really think I can give you an impressive exact answer to that. I'm so sorry about it.
Okay, did you ask
But
any question related
we
to?
did actually ask them about their food, and they said they cook their own food. They also eat what is available here, so it's like a mixture. Actually, I guess it's more like a hybrid situation in that case. I don't think I can tell you something about food in depth because I did not really study the food culture.
Okay, fine.
Hi Niti.
Hi, Atra.
You did it well.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. During the presentation, you mentioned about the tribe, that is the Gujarati community and the Malayali community, as well as the traders. So there is, we can see a tribe is forming there, right? So how do you define that culture, that multicultural space that is forming with this tribe? Can you talk about that?
Okay, sure. So one thing that I can talk about is from the perspective of space. So when you consider Gujarati Street or Design Ashram, for example, like I said, the building was once a residential building with the ground floor being used for storage as a warehouse and the first floor being used for residence. So in here, we can see how a migrant community is involved because a Gujarati family was living inside the building, which is located in Gujarati Street in Calicut, which has also Malayalis around them. So there's this presence of the Gujarati community that comes in there. And definitely when there is a warehouse, it also suggests that they were into trade. So trade is another reason that actually caused a lot of migratory communities to come into Kozhikode. We also know that it's a port city. So their trade also comes in. So basically they had all these three coming in together, and this actually shaped their space too, because we do not live in a place that occupies one part of our house for as a warehouse, right? We have a home which is not so similar to this, and later on the same thing was actually converted into design ashram, and where the high culture or like something like the art or architecture comes in. So this is how I found all the elements intermingling and also causing something like a very a multicultural interaction in itself happening.
Okay, Nidhi, it's clear.
Thank you.
Niyati, one more. Do you have any literature from these Gujaratis of Calicut?
Okay. Gujaratis of Calicut, I'm not very sure about the literature that they have produced, but we actually collected a lot of articles, and also a particular article that the oldest member of the Gujarati community, Vijay Singh Padamsi, his article from a journal. So these were the texts that we connected for this. So it was always based on history that talked about their settling and about how they came in before the Portuguese even, and about their lives here.
Okay. And one more thing, I joined very late into the presentation. I'm sorry, whether I don't know whether you had discussed about this. How do this kind of space concept theories treat time, the concept of time? Is there any kind of relations, or how that theories treat time, the concept of time?
Yeah, from what I have understood, I believe time and space is equally important. Just like how Edward Soja says, time has always been treated as something that is full of life and fecundity, but space has been considered dead beyond before these studies evolved. So right now, I believe it's about looking at both space and time with equal importance, and it is about the potential that this creates. So instead of conducting a study where you consider time as more important, or instead of conducting a study where you think space is more important, I think it creates more opportunities and more ideas and thoughts, and it leads to more research when you consider both equally important. And I think that is how it is seen right now.
More than the more important thing, when we say space,
Mm.
I think the time is already in it, the cultural context. When we say in particular
Yeah,
space,
definitely. You can't study something in isolation from the years that have passed on, right?
yeah, so this should be gone through parallel, right? When we say
Yeah.
space, it's about a particular time, how that space is being culturally affected or
Yeah,
influenced.
because that is how we locate the years or whatever, right? So we consider this period and we say this is how the space was during that time. So that runs in parallel. That is definitely there. I
Okay.
don't see how you can see or state something while doing research without mentioning the time period, right?
Okay, do we have any theories saying like this kind of parallel relation with both space and time? Do
Uh,
we have any theories?
no, I don't. I don't really know about that. And your point is also not really clear. Can you make it more clear? Your question.
Okay, what I mean is that ഈ സ്പേസ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ അതിൽ ടൈം ഓൾറെഡി ഇൻവോൾവ് ആണ്.
Other. Mm.
അപ്പോൾ ഈ ഇതിനെ രണ്ടിനെയും ഒരേപോലെ സ്പേസിൽ ടൈം ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന രീതിയിൽ വല്ല തിയറികളും ഉണ്ടോ എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ ചോദിച്ചത്.
ഇല്ല എനിക്ക് അറിയുന്നത് വെച്ചിട്ട് സ്പേസിൽ ടൈം ഉണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ പറയുന്നില്ല. ബേസിക്കലി സ്പേഷ്യൽ തിയറി വരുന്നതും ഹ്യൂമാനിറ്റീസിൽ ഈ ഒരു സ്പേഷ്യൽ ടേൺ വരുന്നതും സ്പേസിന് ഒട്ടും ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് കൊടുക്കാതിരുന്നത് കൊണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെയാണ് നമ്മളുടെ ഈ തിയറീസ് വരുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ ഇപ്പോൾ റൈറ്റ് നൗ രണ്ടും ഈക്വലി നമ്മൾ കൺസിഡർ ചെയ്ത് പോകണം എന്നുള്ളൊരു രീതിക്കകത്താണ് ടോക്സ് വരുന്നത്, ഫ്രം വാട്ട് ഐ നോ.
ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, I think we can conclude now. Um, so, we are actually hoping to host more talks on spatial studies. So I think, I hope this is a really good beginning. And thank you again, Niyati, for this presentation. And thank you all for engaging and making this even more interesting and even more richer.
Thank you so
There
much.
is one more question, I guess.
Okay, sure.
Uh, so I think there's one more question at the chat section, but
Okay, the question is about the colonial history of Calicut. I can brief you. I don't think we have time enough to talk about that in detail. But as we all know, Calicut is a port city, and the colonial history also is very much linked with it being the port city. It was colonized by the Portuguese first, and it's even before that the Gujarati community came into it. I have focused my study on the Gujarati migration and also how that has happened. So the rest of it, I think, if you give me your contact, maybe I can tell you about it in detail. I can refer and tell you about in detail, then give you a vague idea about it.
Hello.
Hi, Sana.
Hi. Before you conclude, I'm Saina. Nidhi, hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, Shalini was asking about the relationship between, human space. So, uh, is there anything that you can talk about the identity and, human identity or each person's identity that is contributed by the space?
Okay.
Uh, okay, you got my question?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So talking about identity, all our identities are very much related to the space we grew up in, what we see around us, be it the environmental factors or even the cultural factors, and also our personal lives and homes. So here, within this space, when somebody is growing up, we can't really consider the design ashram as a place of growing up right now because it's not still a residential area. So right now, I think it shapes the people who gets within those four walls. I can't say that it is just space that shapes the identity of the individuals. I should also mention that the individuals also shape the place in turn. So, considering how the space shapes individuals, I can tell you how I can use another example for this also. There is a particular way we behave within different spaces. Once we get into a church or a library, our body manner and how we behave automatically changes. Nobody is telling us how to behave, but our body manner and our identity and how we behave within such typical spaces, there's this change that we see. So, in the same way, when it comes to design ashram, we see how fluid it is. So, the presence of its past is definitely very evident. So, you as an individual, when you get inside, there's this identification that you make with the history of the place. You're also aware about the history of the place and about the structure of the place. Then, like I said, it consists of a library, and also it also acts as a venue to events like open mic sessions and Kerala Literature Festival, etc. So there is this talk or this discussion about arts and about literature that happens within this space. So there's this very abstract, not really tangible sort of an effect that has on people who enters the space, right? And even the travelers who come in, you can see how the travelers share their experiences. It can be directly through a conversation. It can also be about the presence that they share within the space, and also about a random visitor who comes in, who gets to be within this discussion, also shares this kind of conversation with the others. So there's always stories, there's always the history, there's always you that is being present there. So I believe there is this mixture of all that this creates, and I think every individual creates something characteristic of themselves for themselves. when they enter the space. If you're talking about residential areas, for example, if you take Fort Kochi, for example, you can see how, if you take the Jewish community, you can see how the identities are created within that space, but that's only for the present generation. The older generation's identities were created outside the place. For example, if they came from Gujarat in this case, their older generation's identity still 20, 25 age is created outside. And later they come into Kerala. So the rest of their identity after that 25 years of age is created here. So it's not just the identity, it's also about their memories. So we see how sometimes for an individual, their identity formation and also their memories are located in two different spots and not just one. So this is how it can affect a person's identity, I believe.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Niyati.
Hi, Tara.
Hope you're doing good.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well too.
Yeah. So, I would like to ask about, you were speaking about space and identity, but little curious about to know the culture. I would like to ask, do you find any similarities? We have heard that Matanjeri, which is known as Little Gujarat, and we can find many Gujarati schools, shops, everything there. So for that reason, I hope that it is known as Little Gujarat. And I would like to ask, do you find any similarities among the culture, not of space and identity? Do you find any similarities among this both culture?
Okay. Definitely, the similarities would be there because they are all communities that come from the same place. And to look at institutions, there's a Gujarati school and a temple in both the places. And the difference basically would be created because Kochi is a metropolitan city. So the differences between a metropolitan city and one which is not would always be there. And Kochi also has a space for everybody, I believe, than when compared to the rest of the places. There's nothing that is more or less. And I believe that is the major difference that I can find. Unless I conduct an equivalent study in Kochi focusing on the Gujarati community, I don't think I can tell you something more exactly or more deeply than this.
Thank you. Thank you, Niyati.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anybody feels like adding anything to the conversation, they can do. We still have time. I think that's it. Thank you everyone for joining, for asking questions, for engaging with our speaker. Thank you, Niyati, for such an elaborate session.
Thank you, Shalini, and thanks to everyone who's joined. Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions too.
Okay, we shall wind up. Thank you all.